Hey guys, it's Carmel Brown, and today I want to talk to you about effectively communicating with teens. So, there are three things that are the most pleasurable yet the most challenging that we face in life. And one of those is marriage, the other is parenting, and then the third one is our careers. Those are the things that bring us the most joy, but also bring us the most challenges. And so, if you were at Love Church, and I think it was 2018 sometime, maybe about a year ago, you may have been present whenever I presented this particular topic. This is the exact same PowerPoint presentation. So if you were there, this will look familiar to you. It's been about a year ago, and maybe a little less than a year. And some of you, I figured I would share this with everybody else because it's really good information. And I see so many parents coming in with their kids regarding parenting issues. And, sometimes we just need a little help with parenting. We all do. Parenting isn't easy. Our kids don't come with a manual. And so I want to talk to you today about this. Now, this is a lot of information. I will make it as fast as possible, but this won't be a 3-minute video. So if you don't get a chance to watch it all, make sure you have some time to sit down and watch this whenever you decide to look at it, because it is going to be pretty lengthy, lots of information. All right, so let's get started. All right, so the first thing that I really want to point out is that the most important thing to consider when parenting teens is building a rapport. Building a rapport is so important with parenting. Building a rapport in any relationship is really important. It's the most basic pillar in being effective in any personal or professional relationship, especially with teens. This is important with sales relationships. If you have a sales job, you have to build a rapport with your clients. It's important in counseling. When I have clients come in, I have to build a rapport with them and get to know them, and we have to learn each other and trust each other before the therapeutic process really is able to process and progress the way it needs to. And then same thing with education, teachers, instructors, educators. You have to build a rapport with your students so that you can be effective with them in the classroom. I don't know if you've ever seen that movie called Lean on Me, Mr. Clark. I think Morgan Freeman played that role. He had this ability to build a rapport with the kids that the other educators and personnel in the school didn't have. Therefore, they came to him with issues and problems that they had that they couldn't talk to anybody else about. Things like teenage pregnancy and gangs and drugs and so on and so forth. So building a rapport is really important when it comes to teens. And each kid, parents, this is really important. Each kid that you have should feel as though they have a special connection with you. I don't care if you have 1 kid or 12 kids. Each and every child that you are raising should feel that they have a special connection with you. Each of those children will be completely different, and you have to learn to adjust to that. As parents, you can't have favorites because one is less resistant than the other. You have to figure out why they're less resistant and be able to adjust to that and parent and love that child accordingly. So making sure that you're not showing favorites, because that is certainly going to prevent you from being able to build a healthy rapport with the children that you're not connecting with. And then also make sure that you remember that your kids are going to be more respectful, and more, sometimes even more protective of their parents whenever they have a good rapport with you. Like, they will protect you if they feel that someone else or some entity is somehow trying to cause harm to you. Obviously, we don't want our children protecting us, but when you have a really good rapport with your kids, they're going to be more respectful and more protective of their parents, all right? And then also, they're going to be more likely to come to you when they can't go to anyone else. I don't know about you, but I want to be my kids' number one. I want to be the first person that they come to if they have a problem. I don't want to be the last person to learn. And unfortunately, that's what occurs a lot of the times with parents. They're the last ones to find out what's going on with their kids. The neighbors know, the other parents that their kids go to school with know, because their kids have told them, but nobody's told you, your kid hasn't told you, and you're just in the dark. Nobody likes to be in that place. So build that rapport with your kids so that they will feel comfortable coming to you and talking to you. All right? So, some kids try to prevent building a rapport. So I want to warn you about this. Some kids are resistant to building a rapport with their parents. And this is for numerous reasons. And some of those reasons are fear of being rejected, lack of support, lack of familiarity, with closeness. So they can be not familiar with their parents because you haven't been present as much as you should have been. Maybe you work a lot, or maybe you're not the custodial parent. And sometimes they haven't been close to anyone throughout their entire life. And maybe you as a parent are just learning to be close to your kids, or just trying to be close for the first time. So it's really important for you to understand that if your kids are putting up a wall, it just may be that it's just not familiar to them. And you have to be able to work around that. Don't give up because they're resistant. And then also, sometimes it's due to history of neglect. Once again, you may not have been there in the past, or maybe you have rejected them in the past, and so they're afraid of being neglected or rejected again. So they have decided it's safer for them. They're protecting their emotional well-being. It's safer for them to not allow that closeness to occur. And sometimes it's things like depression or anxiety. So they have learned to isolate themselves so that they can cope and manage. And they feel as if that is a way to protect themselves from harm, okay, or from being overwhelmed or stressed out. So they build that wall and they isolate themselves. Once again, work around that. Don't allow them to isolate themselves, depressed or not. As parents, you have to not give up. And then sometimes it's low self-esteem. They just don't want to be close to anyone. If you have this situation going on with your kids, come talk to me. Call me, email me. I would love to speak with you about what's going on with you and with your children in the home, and help you to be able to work around that. Because some parents come in, they're like, hey, I don't know what else to do. I give up. And you certainly don't want to do that. All right. Giving up is not an option when it comes to our children. You have to stay in there. And I'm telling you, in the long run, you will be so happy that you didn't. Something I want to make note of is that you need to pay close attention to kids with behavioral issues. If you have kids with behavioral issues, and also to kids who isolate themselves from other people. You want to pay close attention to that, because sometimes those can be indicators that there's something else going on with your children. All right. So, understand the teen brain. This is important, guys. This is important. Now, our brains change every day. Everybody's brains change every day. And our experiences, what we see and what we experience, what we hear every day, shapes the way our brain develops. Now, our brain development is impacted by things like trauma, problems at home, social problems. And teens, they don't have a fully functioning, developed brain yet. And I bet some of you are saying, I knew that there had to be something wrong with that kid's brain. Sometimes you hear parents say things like, have they just completely lost their mind? Like, what is wrong with their brain? It's not functioning well. Well, you are absolutely right. Their brains are not fully developed. The teen brain, though, one thing that I want to mention is that it is highly responsive to rewards. And we'll talk more about that. Now, kids, they're big, especially these teenagers. They're bigger than we are. They look like adults. And sometimes we expect them to act like adults as a result. But guess what? They are not grown-ups at all, no matter how big they are. I have 2 children myself. Both of them are bigger than me. My daughter's taller than I am. My son is taller and bigger than I am. So they look grown up, but they're not fully developed. And teens are going through so many changes at the same time. And as parents and adults, we forget that. Our teachers forget it. Parents forget it. The people that are handling the kids at the church or in the community forget it. And their bodies and their brains and even their responsibilities and their environment are constantly changing throughout their teen years. Just think about what it's like going to high school versus going to middle school or elementary school. Just the entire environment itself is different. All right? And then their environments at home sometimes change. You know, unfortunately, divorces happen, separations happen. Sometimes parents' health status changes, or their parents' job changes. And so there's constant changes in their life. Not to mention their social life. Their group of friends change. They may break up with a boyfriend or girlfriend and A couple months later, they have a different boyfriend or girlfriend, or maybe they never had a boyfriend or girlfriend, and all of a sudden they have one. But things are constantly changing for them, and so can be kind of confusing and exhausting for them. Now, starting at the age of 11 or 12 up until about the age of 18, kids have drastic changes that occur. Drastic changes. It's exhausting, and it's a very emotional process for the children, for the parents, or for anyone else that's involved in that child's life. Let's talk about the prefrontal cortex of the brain. Now, the prefrontal cortex of the brain, it's changing up until their 20s, actually. All right? So, it is the last part of the brain to develop fully. And that's because it develops from front to back. All right? So, this part of the brain is what helps us to consider consequences. It helps to evaluate any risks or any potential consequences of our actions. So not just the consequences, but potential consequences. And then also it helps us to evaluate any risk that may be involved with our behavior. The prefrontal cortex also helps you to regulate the things that are the most out of control with most teenagers and young adults, their behaviors and their emotions. So if it isn't fully available as a teen, it makes sense that teens might not always make the best decisions, and they may not always completely understand the consequences of their behavior. So I hear parents say all the time, I'm guilty of it myself, of saying, did you not think about the consequences? You didn't think this whole thing through. Well, guess what? More than likely, they tried to think it through, or maybe they didn't. But either way it goes, the way their brain is developed at that point in time, they probably were not able to process that properly, the potential consequences. And so they do a lot of risky things and impulsive things, and then they suffer the consequences because they weren't able to properly process the potential risk or consequences involved with the behavior. Now, let's look at the different regions of the brain here, all right? So we got the prefrontal cortex, the parietal lobe, the striatum, the hippocampus, the amygdala. So let's talk about those different regions, and let's look inside the teenage brain. Let's first talk about that prefrontal cortex, all right? That is this region of the brain here, all right? Now, functions of the prefrontal cortex include planning and reasoning, and it's growing up until the age of 25 years old. Now, this is fully developed for adults, but for teens, it's immature, and they are prone to high-risk behavior because this prefrontal cortex is not fully developed, all right? So planning and reasoning, they just don't have it. So that's why they're disorganized. They're not thinking about consequences. They're impulsive. So just know that. Now, the parietal lobe here, responsible for touch, sight, language. This also is growing until the early 20s, fully developed as adults, but teenagers don't process this information properly, all right? So it takes some development into their early 20s before that parietal lobe is fully developed. Let's talk about the striatum, all right? So the striatum, reward center, not fully developed in teens. It is fully developed in adults, all right? So now, let's talk about what the striatum does. It's the reward center. This is the reward center. All right? Striatum, parietal lobe, and that's the prefrontal cortex. So this ventral striatum, this is the reward center. And remember what I said earlier. Teen brains are highly sensitive to rewards. So we will revisit that. All right? So for teens, they're more excited by rewards than consequences. That's that striatum, all right? So that's where that happens. They're more excited by rewards than consequences. So when you're disciplining your kids, that's something to remember. Rewards, their brain responds to that way more than their brain responds to consequences. Let's talk about the hippocampus. This is the hub of memory, and that's down here. That's the hippocampus. All right, so that is the hub for memory, and it's still growing in the teen years, fully functioning with adults. But the thing about that hippocampus is that with adults, as we age, it actually starts to deteriorate. We start to lose some of the neurons with age in that hippocampus. So there's a tremendous learning curve for teenagers when it comes to the hippocampus. That's something to remember. The amygdala, all right? The amygdala. Now, that is the emotional core for passion, impulses, fear, aggression, and all of that. Now, adults rely less on the amygdala. The adults use the prefrontal cortex more so than the amygdala when it comes to, emotions and impulses and aggression. Whereas since the prefrontal cortex is underdeveloped in teens, they more so use the amygdala, but they're much more impulsive. All right. So just to give you a basic, I don't want to turn this into a science lesson, but that's kind of what's going on with the teen brain. So the teen brain, two things I want you to remember. Teen brain is highly responsive to rewards when making decisions. Now, I want to talk to you about a experiment that was done with UCLA. But first, I just want to make sure that you understand that the striatum is the key component of the reward system in the brain. That particular part of the brain releases dopamine in adults, children, animals, and rodents. Now, because as we talk about this UCLA study, we're going to be talking about the striatum or the reward system, the reward center. So there was a study done. UCLA conducted this study. Scientists gave participants a reward. Okay? They gave teens and adults sugar water through a straw. And they asked each participant, the adults and the teenagers, if they liked the sugar water. Both the teens and adults stated that they liked the water. But the teens' rating of how much they liked the water was way higher than the rating of the adults. So, in the deeper levels of the brain was extremely responsive to the sugar. What's the deeper levels of the brain? That's where that striatum is. Everyone's brain reacted positively, but the teen's brain showed an extreme response of excitability to the stimulus. All right, in the reward system, the striatum. So they also tried the same experiment with teens and younger children, which is very interesting. But instead of using sugar water, this time they used money. All right, they used money, which is another highly liked item. All right, sugar. Everybody likes sugar. Everybody likes money. So with the children, the young children and the teens, they use money just so that they could have a different stimulus. And so they added the younger kids to the experiment. The brain scans that they conducted on the kids showed an exaggerated amount of excitability to the stimulus in the brain of the teens, all right, more so than the brain in the adults or the younger children. So with the sugar water and the money, the teenagers, they responded, they had more excitability in the brain, in the reward system or center of the brain than anyone. So there's something very special about the teenage brain compared to any other population, which is good. There are some risks involved, but it's also some rewards involved. All right. So the teen brain is very responsive to its environment. And the teen brain gets really excited about rewards. We know that. The sensitivity in the teen brain creates an opportunity for them to take risks, which is good. We want them to learn how to take risks, and we want them to learn to take risks while they're still at home as teenagers so that we can monitor this and we can encourage them and direct them and give them guidance. All right? And it also gives them the opportunity to welcome new experiences and also meet new people. These are all beneficial. So them having this part of the brain and their brain being so special allows these opportunities to occur. Now, trauma and adverse childhood experiences, or what we call ACEs. What if some of your teens have grown up in an environment in which they were abused, or maybe they witnessed some type of violence or abuse? Maybe they witnessed criminal activity, chemical dependency, things like that. would this impact their brain development? Absolutely. Absolutely. And how would that impact their brain development? Well, what it would do is it depends on the extent of the trauma and so on and so forth, and the longevity at which the time in which they were exposed to the trauma. So it could hinder or slow down development of the brain, or sometimes it could altogether stop development of the brain. So proper treatment is necessary to prevent those things from happening, or to help clients or children progress beyond that hindrance or that halt in development in different regions of the brain. Now, one thing about trauma is that I want to point out is that a lot of people think that trauma has to be this big traumatic event. A big traumatic event is not required for it to constitute as trauma. So sometimes trauma is smaller things, but long-term exposure. So it doesn't necessarily mean that a kid's been sexually abused, or that their parents beat them, or there was child abuse, that type of thing. Sometimes it's just prolonged arousal in the brain. It's just as traumatic. So it's sexual assault versus a parent who is verbally abusive. Okay? So growing up with a parent who's verbally and emotionally abusive and being exposed to that ongoing prolonged arousal in the brain to that abuse over time, that is trauma. Okay? And that's just as traumatic as sexual assault. All right? So in a different way. All right? So I just want you to know that trauma is trauma, and there's different types of trauma. It's not just one incident. Sometimes it's prolonged exposure to arousal in the brain. So over time, also maybe being exposed to a domestic violence situation at home. That's trauma. Okay? And that's going to impact the brain. So, and remember, our experiences impact our brain and how it develops. So physical abuse, neglect, witnessing a crime, accident, severe injury, obviously those are all traumatic events. Most common complaints, let's move on. Most common complaints from adults about their teenagers. They don't listen. They don't cooperate. They talk back. They're outright disrespectful. They're lazy. Those are most of the complaints that I hear from my parents. Well, some of that, there may be a little bit of truth to some of that, but sometimes that's not the case. Sometimes they have some needs that need to be met that we're not aware of. So the main reason that there's many reasons that kids are uncooperative, or that they seem to be lazy and disrespectful, but let's just refer to it as uncooperative. There's many reasons why teenagers can be uncooperative. And some of them is that, well, the main reason is they don't feel connected. Okay? So they need to feel connected, and they need to feel encouraged, and they need to be made to feel like they're important. So it's important that us as parents and adults and teachers and whoever you are that's working with teens or living with teens, to show interest in them, and also showing them that they matter. So asking questions and acknowledging small things that maybe they do, like seeing that they're doing something that maybe you're not the most interested in, but asking them to show you how to do it. Like most adults despise video games, but maybe just every once in a blue moon or out of the blue, just asking, well, hey, why don't you show me how to play that game? Now, they may or may not want to interrupt their game to show you, an inexperienced gamer, how to play the game. But, it doesn't have to be a video game. I just use that as an excuse. All right? So sometimes when our kids have that behavior that we think is disrespectful and inappropriate and unacceptable, sometimes it's important to make sure that we are so careful that we respond properly with that. Okay? So some of them need someone to say something like, wow, I don't know where that came from, but I'm interested in hearing more about what you're feeling right now. Instead of saying, I know you didn't just say that to me. I can't believe you're talking to me like that. That's how us parents respond sometimes. Or is that just me? So also, it's a relief for kids to know that they don't have to carry the pain and baggage that they deal with and carry alone. And that someone is interested in hearing about how they're feeling and what they're dealing with. Now, let's talk more about needs. they need to feel a sense of accomplishment. This helps them to improve mood and it motivates them to do more. When kids feel defeated, their motivation goes away. When they feel like they're accomplishing things, they're motivated to keep going and to keep working towards stuff. They like compliments rather than criticism and negativity. Remember, that reward center, that striatum, is very active. So if you want to learn more about how you can respond with compliments instead of criticism or negativity with your kids, inbox me, email me, call my office, schedule an appointment. We'll get more into detail about that because I definitely got to keep it moving because this is a very long presentation today. Allow them to be individuals. Keep their stress levels down so that they aren't so angry and scattered. Parents, sometimes we stress our kids out. We all do it sometimes. We get stressed out, we get in a hurry, and we stress our kids and everybody else in the house out. We have to be very careful about doing that. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that moving forward. But kids need coping skills. You know what? Some of us parents don't have the best coping skills. And so we're not teaching our kids coping skills. When you find that your children have poor coping skills, please get them in to see a counselor, get them some help so that they can develop those coping skills. And you might want to consider making an appointment for yourself too, so that you can also develop some healthy coping skills because life can be pretty stressful at times. So, talking back, we talked about that disrespectful behavior and them being lazy. Talking back is like pushing buttons, you know, and sometimes us parents, when our kids are talking back, it's like they're shooting bullets at us and it's like, oh my goodness, oh my goodness, oh my goodness. And it's like they're pushing every button that we possibly have. And we respond to that sometimes inappropriately. So, sometimes words can be so sharp from our kids that it cuts through our sense of authority. And God forbid someone cut through our sense of authority and leaves us feeling so disrespected as parents. Now, every behavior that we see from our children is communication. It's communication. And we have to find out what they're trying to communicate to us with that behavior. Now, adults typically believe that kids are saying, I don't respect you, you aren't the boss of me, I don't have to listen to you, I don't respect you, etc. It may be a plea for your connection or a plea to be heard. They like to be heard, they need to feel connected. Now, back talk is sending important messages such as how they feel inside. Their ability to self-regulate without your help. All right? They're trying to regulate their mood and emotions, so they're verbalizing what they're feeling. And it sounds like back talk to us. And the state of your relationship even. All right? So back talk is their way of saying, I don't feel loved. I don't feel respected. I don't feel connected. And I don't feel heard. So when you hear your kids talking back or being what we call disrespectful, sometimes that's what they're trying to communicate to us, and we have to listen and ascertain whether or not that's what's being communicated. So how do you respond to that? This is important. First, ask yourself, what does this behavior that my kid is displaying trigger in me? Personal childhood messages, feeling disrespected or undervalued, and any unresolved issues that you might have as a parent. Now, this might reduce the likelihood that your personal values, your upbringing, and your biases don't guide your reaction to your kids' reaction or emotional response, or their back talking. So how your parents reacted when you talk back, for example. If your parents slapped you in the face every time you talk back as a kid, and I know there's plenty of adults who had this experience, I've talked to many of them, make sure that that is not your response to your kids talking back, because that's what happened to you. You know how it made you feel as a kid. You know it affected you negatively, emotionally. And so do you really want to repeat that pattern? Or do you want to try to learn how to listen to your kids and figure out what their needs are and how to respond appropriately to them trying to spill out to you what they're feeling? Now, let's talk about think. Think. You have to think when you're responding to your teenagers. THINK. The T is for trust. The H is for helpful, I is for inspiring, N is for necessary, and the K is for kind. So, the T, ask yourself, is what I am about to say true? Refrain from exaggerating or manipulating your point when you're talking to your kids. We all have our ways of doing that when it comes to our children. What are those ways of lying and manipulating from us parents? Well, we all have different ways, but some of us, can be pretty creative with exaggerating and manipulating our kids. H, helpful. It might be true, but not helpful. If it's not helpful, if what you're going to say to your kids when you're responding to them talking back or them being rude or disrespectful or lazy, if it's not helpful, it's going to damage the relationship, period. The I, inspiring. Your words have the ability to either tear your children down or build them up. So before you respond, ask yourself, is what I'm saying to my kid going to be inspiring? Is it going to build them up or tear them down? N, necessary or appropriate. And I told you I would respond to this later, earlier. Before you respond to your kid's behavior, ask yourself, is this necessary or appropriate, or can it wait? Like, for example, criticizing and disciplining your children in front of their peers. I know some parents, I've seen it on social media, embarrassing their kids in front of their peers. They think it's a good idea, but it ruins your relationship with your kids. It humiliates them, and it ruins your opportunity to have a good rapport with them. And it honestly doesn't make them respect you. It might make them fear you. It might make them resent you, but it certainly does not make them respect you, and it doesn't make them feel connected to you. All right? And then also, like, I see parents, there's something going on. Like, for example, let's say dishes. Say the kids did, I'm using dishes because that's always a big deal for me with my kids. They didn't wash the dishes, so, because that's one of their chores. Is it a good idea to talk to them about the dishes as you're dropping them off for school in the morning? Probably not. Probably not. They may have tests going on. They may have social issues going on with their peers that they haven't talked to you about. And so if you're driving them to school and you're stressing them out before they even get to school and have to face all the other things that they have to face throughout their school day, you are hindering the relationship between them. You want to say inspiring and kind things to your kids on the way to school so that when they leave you, regardless as to what they face when they're gone, they leave feeling good. And when they come back home, they know that you're going to do the same thing. So they're coming back to their inspiring and motivating and kind and loving environment where they feel connected. Because sometimes, unfortunately, out in the world, school or whatever, our kids aren't feeling connected, but they need to feel connected at home. And then the last one is kind. There's two ways to say things, kind and unkind. So just watch your nonverbal communication even whenever you're responding to your kids. Sometimes, our demeanor can be unkind. So try not to lecture. Ask questions instead of lecturing. All right, so that they do more talking to you.